Hello, and welcome to a Mondays on Tuesdays podcast. I am your host, Firecrow Silvernight, and today I will be talking about a subject I call the next forest. The next forest is going to be somewhat inspired by a workshop I went to in the late 90s about forest gardening, which is a type of permaculture, which is a type of sustainable agriculture. A bit more than that, there were a few really wild things. The keeper of the seminar that I went to had a chicken coop on a hill. And this chicken coop on a hill, he would weed the grounds and place the weeds at the top of the hill, and the chickens would peck it to eat all the seeds out. By the time they had knocked the weeds down to the bottom of the hill, it was so completely eradicated of weeds that would grow again that he actually remulched the grounds with the remaining organic material. And that's a little bit of the outside the box ideas of permaculture. It's not just sustainable agriculture, it's really interesting ideas about sustainable everything. And I'm talking about the fact that the world is burning down, particularly the economy. And that's scary. But I'm going to talk a bit about what comes next. I don't think I'm the only sort of independent internet content person with this on their mind talking about it. And the reason is it seems like this sort of authoritarian wave in America from Donald Trump's second presidency has enough cracks in it, enough mistakes that people are not overly worried about authoritarianism actually taking root in America and the end of democracy and that kind of thing. Which, we're all cautiously optimistic. So am I. There are definitely still horrible things happening. The concentration camps that were built are still running. There's still people dying. There's still horrible stories of federal agents doing things in Minnesota and around the country. And there's still, really weird, nasty laws trying to make their way through Congress and Senate. And there's horrible things happening. But it doesn't look like it has been convincing enough ruse to have enough support amongst the public. And so the question then is what's next? Historically, authoritarian governments have a power vacuum right after them. That's kind of scary. But importantly, the American economy was not in great shape to begin with for a while. And it looks like the positioning of the American economy in the world was a bit inflated for a while, and that is likely to come to a rather abrupt decline. And I think the underpinning underneath all of this stuff is that the business world in America has been slipping in terms of effectiveness and value and the way it integrates wealth and provides a sort of framework for wealth to spread around the population for quite a while. And I would say, of all of the most serious things that modern society around the world and modern society in America is facing, my diagnosis is very, very simple, which is this. As we moved from a manufacturing economy based on physical goods into a more services economy based on marketing, business operations, distribution strategy, software and other intangible goods, I think we left a lot of things unchanged. And I think that our hiring, firing, promotion, delegation, job description, as well as our education system didn't really round the corner. I mean, if you spend the first 18 years of your life memorizing stuff, filling out multiple choice tests, and then you're told, hey, go out in the world and succeed. Good luck with that. You haven't learned how to communicate. You haven't learned how to work on a team. You haven't learned how to problem solve. Your critical thinking doesn't really amount to the ability to navigate the complexities of the working world or even relationships, health, how to take care of yourself. And so what this really means is that we have relied on repeatable steps and very simplistic authority structures for so long that I think that gap is actually responsible for the majority of the problems that we're seeing today. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what could come next. So let me start off by talking about the education system and why that is such a mismatch for the demands of life. Math class was not a whole lot of fun, and I was actually recruited for the math bee at one point. And I talked to the teacher, said, why me? I'm terrible at this. And she said to me, she said, no, you're not. You are fantastic with the concepts. And in a math bee setting, everyone doesn't have to be good at everything. And your perspective could actually really help the team. This is a realistic approach to modern work and modern life, which is that not everybody has to be good at everything. In fact, teams that perform exceptionally well tend to be ones where not everybody does everything. Being raised for your entire adolescent life believing that either you have to be good at everything makes you really egotistical and uncooperative, but also it means that your ability to give way to someone else who has a complementary expertise, it's such an untrained skill that entering the workforce can be just such a nasty process. So much so that I've been involved in a number of hiring conversations, and my experience has been that there's a lot of discussion to the tune of, we don't want to hire anyone with less than 2 years of work experience. Because the way you work in a team, the way you work in a company is so fundamentally different than the education system that first 2-year process is hard. And there's an obvious problem, which is, where did they get that 2 years of experience if nobody will hire them until they have it? But I think this goes deeper and deeper and deeper into the idea of authority structures within companies that are essentially based on the complete fallacy that the people at the top of the company know what happens in the company. And to further make that problem worse, there was a switch from the term personnel from from what I understand to the 50s and up through the 70s and 80s, and that switched to human resource management. And one of the chief responsibilities of human resource management is to manage the resistance of the staff. And the resistance of the staff was basically, you people at the top have no idea what you're doing. And so we've gone from a time when the operations of a company were somewhat predictable, such that it was somewhat practical to have people at the top calling the shots, to a service-based economy where the changing nature of the things the company's actually doing no longer makes sense for the people at the top to call the shots, yet we have not innovated those reporting structures and job descriptions in the same way that we have not innovated education for a team-based, collaborative, communication-centric, pluralistic world. And I think this actually is what happened. I think we are simply suffering because we did not modernize in ways that we should have and ways that we need to. And so I want to talk a little bit about biology, and I'm talking about forest biology in this case. One of the most interesting things about that seminar in Colorado was they talked about how permaculture essentially was leapfrogging the time it takes for a desert or a sort of boring prairie to become a rainforest, using human intervention of agriculture. So things like, by the time a rainforest happens, it's a complex ecosystem of small forms of vegetation, ground plants, maybe grass, maybe clover, and then, bushes and, maybe nightshades, some of which are vines that need to climb larger plants, maybe bamboo stalks, maybe trees. And then you have the first cover, which is like your first layer of trees, and it doesn't need all direct sunlight. And then you have your top level, which is like the super tall trees that do need direct sunlight. And plants down at the bottom have to kind of manage the amount of moisture or sunlight they have. And then some plants, such as legumes, famously take the soil and produce nitrogen from that, and then other plants need it. And so if you can put these plants together, they can feed off each other and quickly become a very effective ecosystem in about 10 to 15 years. a process that would naturally have taken around 1,000 years, maybe several hundred. And so the idea was studying nature in the way that things work together in order to quickly get to, the state of interactive, cooperative complexity that you want. And to extend the analogy that the world is burning down, let's ask a somewhat strange but simple question, which is it a problem that's burning down? A lot of people have experienced a lot of pain, a lot of inequality. The economy is very K-shaped, which I've always thought was like the visual, the sort of branches of the K, the upward one and the downward one. That's why it's called K-shaped, but maybe there's a, more academic or financial reason why the letter K is used. But K-shaped economy basically means rich get richer, poor get poorer, and that's a cycle that keeps going. And the challenge is that things have been so bad for so while, it's attempting to say, hey, let it burn down, start over, awesome. It can't get worse, it's got to get better. And I would agree that was the case if I didn't feel like at a very fundamental level we lack the skills and the knowledge and the strategies to rebuild the economy in the event that it begins to falter or drop quickly. Part of that comes down to our education system. Part of it comes down to the idea that very basic skills such as team management, sort of the psychology of shared boundaries versus just kind of dominance, and then very basic things like accounting principles, what accounting is, how to track value, how to get your money's worth from something. I don't think that has been enough of people's responsibilities over the years. So I think a lot of us who have been laid off were existing within ecosystems that assumed that kind of basic thing was taken care of and locked away up in the CFO's office or the head of HR's office or the CEO's office, and we never really got to touch it. And so my real concern is that as large companies falter and fall out of the sky, when enough people decide, we're going to rebuild this thing by starting small companies, the expertise we have is, in spades everywhere, everybody's been laid off, is how to implement an existing HR framework, how to implement an existing marketing framework, how to drop into an existing software code base and patch it and modify and keep it going. And the skills we actually need are how to start over. And so my concern is that as the economy burns down, the types of skills that we need are the types of things that we have not been thinking about. And the way we have all been educated is not going to do it. I mean, we're not going to rebuild the economy by filling out little bubbles with number 2 pencils. That's not going to bring back a good way of life. But the good news is that we can rebuild the economy and a way of life based on communication. And I think with the advances in psychology, with computer tooling that can create advances in accounting, things like royalty splits can be calculated to a greater degree of detail. If everybody works on something, allocating a bonus structure can create a much more fair compensation pattern in the direction of a worker-owned company, even if it's not a completely worker-owned company. And accounting really is basic numbers. It's about modeling the way an operation of any kind moves through time in terms of the raw materials it takes in, the assets it generates from those raw materials that are not yet sold, the proceeds of sales, and the needing cash reserves to make it through the next chapter of selling stuff and capturing more revenue. And so I think that the tools are there, the strategies are there, and it's really a matter of, can we accept that it does take starting over, and that does take realizing that we have existed within an environment that assumes that certain things are taken care of that may not have been, and it may just be that so many things drifted when we went from a physical goods to a sort of virtual service goods. And it pains me to say that that's all we have to take care of, because I think the drift is so severe that that's a tall order. But I remain optimistic, as always.